Today, I would like you to consider an idea that may completely change the way you interpret your life. So, what if nothing that happens to you is ever neutral? What if every event becomes meaningful only after your mind decides what it means? Because if that's true, then perhaps the greatest power you possess is not controlling life, it's choosing the meaning you give to it, and that single choice may influence every decision that follows. Let me make it simpler. Imagine waking up tomorrow with one quiet assumption, not a forced affirmation, not blind optimism, just one deeply held conviction. So, whatever happens today, somehow it is moving in my favor. So, you wake up with this assumption: whatever happens today, somehow it is moving in my favor. Notice how different that feels. You can speak out loud, pause the video, and just speak out loud. Whatever happens today, somehow it is moving in my favor. So you haven't changed your circumstances, you haven't solved your problems. Nothing outside has moved, yet something inside feels different. It already has shifted because the mind behaves differently depending on the story it believes. When it expects danger, it searches for signs of danger. When it expects disappointment, it becomes highly skilled at collecting evidence for disappointment. But when it quietly assumes that life is unfolding with intelligence, it begins to notice possibilities that fear would never have allowed it to see. Most of us spend our lives asking a question that quietly keeps us trapped. Why is this happening to me? Isn't it? It's a reasonable question. Why is this happening to me? But it almost always leads us backwards. Like we start searching for blame, we start searching for mistakes, we replay conversation, we keep imagining different endings over and over, and little by little our attention becomes attached to the problem instead of the possibility. Now there is another question, one that very few people would ask, and that is, how might this be working for me? So in any problematic situation, if you reframe the question, how might this be working for me? It will be, you don't change it not because you already know the answer, but because asking a different question invites your mind into a completely different state. One question creates resistance, and why is this happening to me? That is the resistant part. And if you ask, how might this be working for me? This creates openness. And openness has a remarkable way of revealing opportunities that resistance never notices. So, history is full of moments that only made sense in hindsight, in retrospect. The job someone desperately wanted and never received. The relationship that ended despite every effort to save it. The opportunity that disappeared without explanation. At that time, each one of these felt like a loss. But months later, sometimes years later, those same people look back and realize something surprising. If that hadn't happened, none of this would have been possible, what they were living that day in the present moment. So we have all experienced moments like that. A disappointment that eventually became a redirection, a delay that protected us from making the wrong decision, a closed door that quietly guided us towards one we would never have considered normally. Now, this raises an interesting question. So, if life has already surprised you this way before, could it be doing the same thing today, even if you can't see it yet, even if you think that things are not working out for you? The difficulty is that we judge life too early. We are reading the first page and deciding we already know how the story ends. We experience one setback and immediately write a conclusion. Oh, this isn't working. Nothing ever changes for me. Things never go my way. All these things keep propping up in our minds. That's our default. But what if today's chapter is not the conclusion? What if it's simply the transition? A transition to a better future, a bridge between one version of your life and another. The truth is, we often demand understanding before we are willing to trust. Yet understanding usually arrives only later, afterwards, not before. There is an ancient wisdom that appears across many traditions. It suggests that faith is not pretending everything is perfect. Faith is choosing not to let temporary appearances become your permanent conclusions. That's a very different way of looking at life, because now you are no longer asking circumstances for permission to feel peaceful. You are allowing your inner state to exist independently of today's evidence, and strangely, that's often where everything begins to change. Complicated, is it? So let me tell you a story. A woman once described her life as an endless cycle of waiting. Waiting for good news, waiting for circumstances to improve, waiting until she finally felt safe enough to relax. And every morning she began with the same silent question, what will go wrong today? She didn't realize she was asking it, she was inviting it, but she lived as though she expected an answer, and every delay confirmed it. Yes, this was happening, that's what I thought, something is bound to go wrong today. Every inconvenience strengthened it. Every disappointment became another piece of evidence. Then someone asked her a simple question. What if you lived 1 week as though life was quietly supporting you? Not because you could prove it, but because you are willing to test it. At first it felt very unnatural, almost uncomfortable. Nothing outside had changed, but something subtle had. She stopped interpreting every inconvenience as a warning. She became less reactive. She became more patient, more observant. She smiled more. She noticed conversations she would have previously ignored. She accepted invitations she would normally decline. And within weeks, opportunities began appearing that she insisted had never existed before. Perhaps they hadn't suddenly appeared. Perhaps she had become available. Now that's the fascinating thing about our inner assumptions. They don't simply influence how we feel. They influence what we notice, how we respond, and then the choices we make, the energy we bring into every conversation, and eventually those countless invisible decisions begin creating visible outcomes. Not overnight, but consistently. So before we go any further, I would like you to carry one question with you. Not as something to force yourself to believe, simply as an experiment. So that is, what would change if for the next 24 hours you quietly assumed that life was unfolding in your favor even before you had proof? Because sometimes the greatest transformation doesn't begin when life changes. It begins when the meaning we give to life changes first. And that's where our conversation becomes even more interesting. Because once you understand what assumptions really are, you'll begin to see why they quietly shape every experience you have. So let's go deeper. So yes, if our assumptions shape the way we experience life, then the obvious question becomes why? Why should something as invisible as an assumption influence something as tangible as our daily reality? So most people imagine assumptions as simple thoughts. They are not. A thought comes and goes, an assumption stays. A thought is something you think. An assumption is something you stop questioning. You are believing it as a default. And once your mind stops questioning something, it begins treating it as reality. Now think about how effortlessly you assume your name. You don't wake up every morning reminding yourself what it is. You don't debate it. You don't need evidence. It's simply part of who you are. And now imagine how many other assumptions you've accepted just as deeply. Something like, I'm not good with money, people eventually leave, success is difficult, I always struggle. Now, none of these began as facts. They first began as experiences, and then they were repeated often enough that they slowly became identities. And once an assumption becomes part of your identity, your mind quietly organizes your behavior around protecting it. This is why two people can stand before exactly the same opportunity and see completely different futures. One person sees possibility, the other immediately sees risk. Oh my God. One hears, this could change my life. The other hears, this probably won't work for someone like me. Now, the opportunity didn't create those thoughts, it revealed assumptions that were already there within these two different persons. So, life has an interesting way of doing that. It constantly introduces situations that expose the stories we have been silently carrying all along in the invisible form. Think about a child learning to walk. They fall again and again. Do they ever conclude walking isn't meant for me? Of course not. They simply assume people like me eventually learn to walk, and so they keep trying. Failure doesn't become identity, it simply becomes part of the process. Somewhere along the journey into adulthood, many of us quietly lose that assumption. We stop treating setbacks as temporary, we begin treating them as personal definitions. One business fails, maybe I am not entrepreneur. One relationship ends, maybe I am difficult to love. One opportunity disappears, maybe life just isn't on my side. Notice how quickly a single experience becomes a lifelong story. So here's something worth considering. Your mind doesn't spend most of its energy creating your future. It spends most of its energy remaining consistent with the person it believes you already are. I repeat, it spends most of its energy remaining consistent with the person it believes you already are. And that's why genuine change often feels uncomfortable. Not because the new life is wrong, but because it feels unfamiliar. And the unfamiliar mind immediately asks, can this really belong to me? And that's the reason why some people sabotage wonderful relationships, why they hesitate just before major opportunities, why they abandon progress the moment success begins to feel real. It's rarely because they don't want a better life, it's because their old assumptions still feel more believable than their new possibilities. Now, this reminds me of something many of us have experienced. So, you decide to become more confident. For a few days, you speak differently, you dress differently, you begin believing change is possible, and then somebody comes along and criticizes you. Suddenly, every old story returns. See, this is who I really am. What happened? Did your potential disappear overnight? Of course not. Your old assumption simply reclaimed the conversation, and because it was familiar, it sounded more convincing. Now, are you getting it? So, one of the greatest misunderstandings about personal growth is believing that change happens the moment we decide. Decision is important, but identity is stronger. You can decide to become healthier, but if deep inside you assume I'm someone who never follows through, that assumption quietly competes with every conscious decision you make. And eventually, most people don't lose to circumstances, they lose to the identity they have unconsciously rehearsed for years. I hope you are getting it. So, how do assumptions actually change? Not through force, not through endlessly arguing with yourself, and certainly not through pretending to believe something that feels impossible. They change the same way they were created, through repetition, experience, and emotional acceptance. Every assumption you have ever held, positive or negative, began as something unfamiliar. Then it was repeated, and that's how it became believable. Finally, it became invisible, and because the strongest assumptions are the ones you no longer notice, you just take it for granted, and it became embedded in your being. This is why one simple sentence can quietly transform your life. Not because the words are magical, but because they interrupt an old pattern. Imagine beginning every challenge with a different assumption. Instead of saying, why is this happening? Take a pause, take one breath, and ask, if this were somehow leading me somewhere better, what might I not be seeing yet? If this were somehow leading me somewhere better, what might I not be seeing yet? Notice something? That question doesn't deny difficulty. It doesn't pretend pain doesn't exist. It simply refuses to let today's appearance becomes tomorrow's certainty. And that's a very different way of living. I would like you to try something today. Nothing complicated. The next time something unexpected happens, a delayed meeting, an unanswered message, or cancelled plan, before your mind writes its usual story, take a pause and silently say, perhaps this is serving me in a way I can't understand yet. And then continue with your day. No forcing, no pretending, just leave the possibility open. Because remarkable things begin to happen when certainty gives way to trust. And once that trust becomes your natural assumption, you stop living at the mercy of every circumstance. Instead, you begin carrying your peace with you, regardless of what's happening outside. It's like everything is working out in my favor, even though it is invisible right now. So, in the next part now, we'll explore something even more fascinating. So yes, now we arrive at the point where most people unknowingly give up. Not because they stop wanting a better life, but because they mistake today's circumstances for tomorrow's destiny. Think about it. You decide to trust that life is moving in your favor. You feel lighter, more hopeful, more grounded. Then something unexpected happens. An interview doesn't go your way. A client says no. A relationship becomes uncertain. A financial setback appears, and almost instantly your mind whispers, "See, I knew this wouldn't work." That single moment is more important than most people realize, because it reveals which voice you trust more, the evidence in front of you or the assumption you have chosen to live from. The challenge is not learning a new way of thinking. The challenge is remaining loyal to it when reality appears to disagree. That's where transformation either continues or quietly ends. Anyone can feel optimistic when life is cooperating. The real test begins when appearances suggest otherwise, because appearances have an extraordinary ability to convince us that they are the whole truth. But are they really? Let's imagine you plant a seed today. Tomorrow you walk into the garden, nothing has appeared. Would you conclude that nothing is happening? Of course not. You understand something important. Growth is taking place long before it becomes visible. Nature has never rushed to satisfy our impatience, and yet we expect our own lives to do that. We assume that if change isn't immediately visible, then change isn't occurring. Perhaps that's one of the greatest misunderstandings we carry. Every meaningful transformation begins in places we cannot see. Before confidence becomes visible, there are quiet moments of choosing courage. Before relationships improve, conversations change. Before opportunities multiply, attention changes. Before life changes, perspective changes. The outer world often arrives last and not first. So it's the inner world that we are targeting. What are we carrying within us? This is why reacting too quickly can become so costly. Imagine reading only the first chapter of a novel. A character loses everything, another betrays them. The future looks hopeless. You close the book and declare, "I know how the story ends." You would never do that with a novel. Yet many of us exactly do with our lives, own lives. One difficult season becomes nothing ever works out. One unanswered prayer becomes, maybe it wasn't meant for me. One delay becomes, I've missed my chance. The story was never finished, but we decided it was. There is a quiet discipline that very few people practice. That is the discipline of withholding conclusions. I am saying a very important thing. The discipline of withholding conclusions, forming conclusions. Instead of rushing to label every experience, they leave space for understanding, space for perspective, space for life to reveal what they cannot yet see. That doesn't mean denying disappointment. It simply means refusing to let disappointment become identity. There is an important difference. You can experience uncertainty without becoming an uncertain person. You can experience loss without assuming life has turned against you. You can experience delay without believing you are being denied. Think back to your own life. I am almost certain there is something you once desperately wanted. That didn't happen. At that time it felt devastating. Today, would you honestly choose that old path over the life you are living now? Probably not. Why? Because time revealed what emotion could not. You saw connections that were invisible in the moment. The mind only had a single piece of the puzzle. Life was holding the whole picture. What if that's still true today? What if the thing you are worrying about this week will eventually become the story you tell with gratitude, not because it was pleasant, but because it quietly redirected everything to something better? That possibility alone changes the way we move through uncertainty. Instead of asking, why hasn't this happened yet? We begin asking, what is this preparing me for? Notice the difference? One question comes from impatience, the other comes from trust or surrender. This does not mean becoming passive. Trust isn't sitting still and hoping life improves. Trust changes the quality of your action. You still make the phone call, you still apply for the opportunity, you still improve your skills, you still have difficult conversation, but now you are no longer acting from panic. You are acting from confidence. One says, I have to force life to cooperate. The other quietly says, my responsibility is to take the next step. Life will take care of the next 100. That's a completely different state of mind. I would like you to try another experiment. The next time something doesn't go according to plan, resist the urge to immediately explain it. Instead, simply tell yourself, I don't know the full story yet. Yes, most of the time, that's the truth. I don't know the full story yet. That's all. Leave the ending unwritten. Because the moment you stop insisting that every event must make sense immediately, you become available to possibilities that certainty would have hidden. So, where does all of this leave us? If assumptions quietly shape our experience, if meaning influences the way we respond, if trust keeps us from abandoning the future too soon, then how do we actually live this way? Not only on good days, but as a way of being even when things are not working our way. I think it begins with a simple realization. Life doesn't ask us to know the future. It only asks us to choose the state from which we will meet it. Every morning, before you read the news, before you check your phone, before circumstances begin telling you how to feel, you have a choice. You can enter the day expecting life to prove your fears, or you can enter the day quietly trusting that somehow life is moving with you rather than against you. That single decision changes far more than your mood. It changes the quality of your presence. Imagine two people walking into the same meeting, both equally qualified, both equally prepared. One silently thinks, I hope this goes well. The other quietly thinks, whatever happens here will serve me. From the outside, they look identical. From the inside, they are living in completely different worlds. One is asking reality for permission to feel secure. The other carries security into the room, and people notice that, not because confidence is loud, but because certainty has a quietness that doesn't need to prove itself. One of the greatest misunderstandings about trust is believing it removes difficulty. It doesn't. Life will surprise you, plans will still change, things will still go wrong, people will still disappoint you. There will still be seasons where nothing seems to move. But the difference is those moments no longer become evidence that life has abandoned you. They simply become part of a story that hasn't finished unfolding. That shift is very subtle, but it changes everything, because when you stop fighting every chapter, you finally have the energy to live that chapter. Now think about the conversation you have with yourself. Not the ones you speak aloud, but the silent ones. The ones that begin the moment something unexpected happens. You miss an opportunity. What do you immediately say? Someone doesn't reply to your message. What's the first story your mind creates? An investment doesn't work. A plan changes. A dream takes longer than expected. Listen carefully what's going in your mind, because those quiet conversations eventually become the atmosphere in which you live. If every internal sentence begins with, why does this always happen to me? Your world gradually feels heavier. If those same moments begin with, instead, perhaps I don't understand this yet, something remarkable happens. Your mind stays open instead of defensive, and an open mind notices solutions that a fearful mind walks straight past. I don't believe peace comes from having every answer. I think peace comes from no longer demanding immediate answers. There is a freedom in admitting that I can't see the whole picture today. Because the moment you stop insisting on certainty, you create room for wisdom. Sometimes the greatest act of faith isn't believing something extraordinary, it's simply refusing to believe the worst. So, here is an experiment I would love you to try this week. Choose one situation that has been weighing heavily on your mind. Don't try to solve it, don't analyze it for hours, and don't search endlessly for reassurance. Instead, each morning, spend just 1 minute asking yourself, if I truly believe this was ultimately working in my favor, how would I walk through the day? Notice the question isn't how would I feel if it had already happened. It's even simpler. How would I behave today? Would you still worry as much? Would you delay that conversation? Would you avoid making the decision you've been postponing? Or would you move through the day with a little more calm, little more confidence, little more trust? Because sometimes the greatest evidence that our assumptions have changed isn't found in our circumstances, it's found in our behavior. It's the way we behave while passing through the day. Over the years, I have come to realize something surprisingly simple. Life often feels exactly as uncertain as it always has. What's different is the story we choose while living through it. Some people spend years waiting for certainty before they allow themselves to feel hopeful. Others quietly choose hope first and allow certainty to arrive later. Perhaps that's what living from the end really means. Living from the end. Not pretending the journey is over, not ignoring reality, but refusing to let today's appearance again become tomorrow's identity. So the next time life surprises you, pause before giving the moment a meaning. You don't know yet whether this is an ending, a lesson, a protection, or the beginning of something you can't yet imagine. Leave space for life to finish speaking, because some of the greatest blessings never arrive looking like blessings. They arrive disguised as delays, closed doors, unexpected endings, or uncomfortable detours. Only later do we recognize that they were quietly carrying us somewhere we could never have planned for ourselves. I would like to leave you with one final thought. What if from this moment forward you stopped measuring your life by today's evidence and started measuring it by the quality of the assumptions you carry every day? Because eventually, circumstances change, opportunities appear, people come and go, seasons pass, but one thing quietly remains constant. That is the meaning you give to life, and eventually becomes the life you experience. So perhaps tomorrow morning, before anything else, simply remind yourself, I don't know exactly how today will unfold, but I choose to believe that somehow it is unfolding in my favor. Live from that place, walk from that place, speak from that place. Not because life has already proved it, but because every meaningful transformation begins with an inner decision before it ever becomes an outer reality. And maybe years from now, when you look back at this season of your life, you will smile. Not because everything went according to your plan, but because everything unfolded exactly as it needed to. If this conversation gave you a new way of looking at life, let me know in the comments. Have you ever experienced something that felt like a setback but later became one of the greatest blessings in your life? I would genuinely love to read your story. And if you know someone who's in the middle of a difficult season right now, share this conversation with them. Sometimes we don't need another solution. Sometimes we simply need a different way of seeing the path we are already walking. Until next time, take care of your mind, because the way you see your life quietly becomes the life you see.